There's something honestly kind of wild about falling for someone whose whole world is made of ice. Like, literally carved out of frozen water, while you're the exact opposite. Whatever warmth they radiate, you seem to soak it up like a solar panel. I never thought I'd say that about an ice sculptor, but here we are. So, picture this. I'm bundled up like a marshmallow, 3 layers of sweaters, a scarf so huge I could probably smother a small animal with it, standing in the middle of the town's annual winter festival. You know the type. Strings of fairy lights reflecting off snow-dusted rooftops, the smell of roasted chestnuts blending with that weirdly comforting scent of hot cocoa. It's the kind of place people come to pretend winter isn't trying to kill them with its endless cold. I was there with a couple of friends, mostly to have some fun and escape the monotony of my usual routine, which was mostly working from home and trying not to turn into a hermit. Then I saw him. He was standing at the center of the festival's main square, completely absorbed in his work, chiseling away at a massive block of ice. The way the little chips sparkled every time his chisel hit made the whole scene look like some sort of magic show. He wasn't just making art, he was commanding the ice itself. And it wasn't just the sculpting that caught my attention, though that was impressive. It was the calm, focused energy he carried, almost like he was at peace in that freezing cold, while the rest of us were shivering and stomping our feet trying to stay warm. I later found out his name was Theo. He'd moved to town just a few months before the festival, supposedly chasing some dream about making it big as an artist. But no one really knew much about him because he kept to himself outside of the festival days, when he was basically the main event. I was curious from the start, not just because his ice sculptures were mesmerizing, but because he seemed so untouched by the cold. Like he belonged there in a way I never did. That night, I couldn't stop watching him work. The festival was buzzing with people laughing and drinking, but there was this quiet bubble around Theo and his ice block. I swear, the warmth from my gloves and jacket couldn't compare to the weird heat I felt just standing near him. Later on, thanks to some well-timed clumsiness on my part, because of course I tripped and almost crashed into his sculpture, I ended up talking to him. That conversation was the first crack in the ice, both literally and figuratively. It's funny how someone who spends hours shaping frozen water can slowly start melting the walls you've built around yourself. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but something about that night felt like it would change everything. I just had no idea how much. So, there I was, tangled in my own 2 feet, careening toward what should have been a perfect ice sculpture, and at the last second, Theo caught me. Not in some heroic way, just a quick grab of my arm that stopped me from face-planting into his masterpiece. I was mortified, cheeks burning hotter than anything that night, and all I could stammer out was, sorry, I'm such a klutz." He just smiled, this soft, easy smile that made me forget how cold my fingers were, and said, "It's okay, happens to the best of us." Then he looked down at the sculpture, running his gloved hand over the smooth lines he'd already carved. "I'm Theo, by the way. Matt," I said, still feeling like I should apologize again. Honestly, meeting someone like him in a small town during a freezing festival should have felt cliché, but it didn't. It felt like a genuine moment. We talked for a few minutes, mostly about the sculpture, which was turning into a giant swan, glistening under the festival lights. I asked what inspired him to become an ice sculptor, and he shrugged like it was no big deal. "It's all about capturing something fleeting. Ice melts. But for a little while, it's perfect." I liked that answer. It was poetic without being cheesy. And maybe that's when I first started noticing how much I wanted to know him beyond the ice block he was shaping. After that night, I found myself wandering back to the square whenever I could. I'd bring hot coffee or a thermos of tea, and sometimes we'd talk for hours, Theo carving and me warming up. He told me about growing up near a mountain town where winter didn't quit, about how ice sculpting wasn't just art, but a kind of meditation for him. I shared stories too, the usual stuff. My job, my love-hate relationship with winter, the fact I'd never had the guts to do anything wild with my life. One evening, the festival was winding down, and the crowd thinned out, but Theo kept working, chipping away at the final details of his swan. The air was crisp, my breath visible in the cold, and for once, I wasn't freezing. Not because of my layers, but because of something else. Maybe the way he looked up and caught my gaze, soft eyes catching the light like the ice itself. "You're still here," he said, his voice low but warm. "I told you, I'm kind of hooked," I admitted, wrapping my hands around my coffee cup. He laughed, this quiet sound that made my chest tighten. Then, without thinking much, I said, "Do you ever get cold, though? Like, really cold?" He looked past me for a moment, then back. "Sometimes, but there's always a way to warm up. Even ice has a warmth if you look close enough." I wanted to ask what he meant, but before I could, he leaned closer and whispered, "You're the warmest thing around, you know." My heart did that ridiculous jump you only feel the first few times you realize you like someone way more than you should. I felt the heat rush up my neck, the cold air suddenly sharper. For a second, the whole festival, the lights, the noise, everything faded into the background, and it was just us. From there, things started to get complicated. Theo wasn't the kind of guy who opened up easily. There were flashes of vulnerability I caught, moments when he'd pause mid-carve, fingers trembling, eyes clouding over, but then he'd shake it off and get back to work like nothing happened. I knew there was more beneath that cool exterior, but I didn't want to push. Not yet. One night, about a week after the festival ended, he invited me to his tiny apartment, which doubled as his studio. It was nothing like the icy world he crafted during the day. Warm lights, cozy blankets tossed over the couch, and a little kitchen that smelled faintly of cinnamon and something spicy I couldn't place. We sat close on the couch, the kind of close where your legs brush and your hands find an excuse to touch. Conversation flowed easier than I expected, and for once, I didn't feel like I had to perform or be anyone but myself. At one point, he reached out and tucked a stray strand of hair behind my ear. "You don't have to be afraid of the cold," he said softly. "Or of me." I wanted to tell him I wasn't afraid. Well, not of him anyway. But instead, I just nodded, feeling like maybe I was already thawing out in ways I didn't understand. That night ended with a tentative, shy kiss, the kind that felt like the first real chapter of something neither of us knew the ending to yet. Looking back, I realize how lucky I was to stumble into that festival, into his world of ice and light, because sometimes the coldest places can hold the warmest surprises. And sometimes the person who seems frozen on the outside is just waiting for someone to see the fire inside. After that night, things started moving in ways I hadn't expected. The festival was over, the crowd's gone, but somehow my world had expanded to include Theo's. We began spending more time together, not just at the square or studio, but wandering through town, grabbing late-night coffee, even silly movie marathons where we'd argue about which films were too cheesy or not cheesy enough. It was easy, comfortable, and honestly, the kind of thing I didn't realize I'd been missing. But the more I learned about him, the more I sensed there were parts he was holding back. Not because he didn't trust me, but because it felt like some memories were too sharp or too cold to share. One afternoon, we were sitting on a bench overlooking the frozen river that ran through town. The sun was out, but the air still had that winter bite. Theo was quiet, staring at the ice, fingers tracing patterns on his coffee cup. "Hey," I said, nudging him gently. "You've been kind of distant lately. What's going on?" He sighed, looking over with those deep eyes that seemed to hold storms. "It's nothing. Just old stuff I'm trying not to let freeze me in place." I wanted to press, to tell him I could carry some of that weight if he'd let me. But I held back. Instead, I said, "You don't have to carry it alone." He studied me, maybe weighing whether to open up or retreat. Finally, he said, "My dad was a sculptor too. Not ice, but stone. He was tough, hard to please. I spent years trying to prove I wasn't just his shadow. When he died, I thought carving ice might be a way to finally craft something that was truly mine. But sometimes, I feel like I'm still just shaping his expectations." I nodded, heart tight. "That sounds rough. But you're not him, Theo. You're your own person." He gave a small smile, and I think that was the first time I saw him truly relax in a while. "Thanks, Matt. That means more than I can say." Those moments, the quiet confessions, the shared silences, started to build a kind of trust between us. It wasn't flashy or fast, but it was real. I realized I was falling for him the way you fall into a cold lake unexpectedly, shocking at first, but then the shock fades, replaced by a strange kind of calm. One chilly evening, we decided to go ice skating at the rink they'd set up for the festival, which was still open for a few more weeks. Neither of us were pros, me especially, but it was the perfect excuse to be close, to laugh at our clumsy attempts, and to feel alive in the cold air. At one point, I caught Theo just as he was about to lose balance. I grabbed his hand, steadying him, and our eyes locked. The world seemed to hush around us. "You know," I said, voice low, "I'm not scared of the cold when I'm with you." He squeezed my hand, his breath misting in the air. "I think you might be the only thing that can keep me warm all winter." That night, when we finally got back to his place, the temperature outside was well below freezing, but the apartment was cozy, filled with low light and the scent of pine from a tiny Christmas tree he'd set up. We sat together on the couch and I felt a quiet strength in just being near him. But then, the next day, things shifted. Theo got a call that sounded tense, and his face tightened in a way I hadn't seen before. When he told me it was from his family, I could tell there was more beneath the surface. "They want me to come home for the holidays," he said quietly, "but I'm not sure I'm ready for that." I didn't ask why. Sometimes, the hardest parts of someone's story are the ones they have to face alone. Instead, I told him, "Whatever you decide, I'm here." A few days later, Theo left town. I didn't want to admit how much I missed him, how the apartment felt emptier without his presence. But even from a distance, our calls and messages kept the warmth alive. When he came back, something was different. He was quieter, a little more guarded, but there was also a new kind of strength in him. Like whatever he'd faced while he was away had chipped away at some of the old ice and revealed something more real underneath. One night, back at his place, we sat by the window watching the snow fall. I reached out, taking his hand in mine. "You're not alone anymore, Theo. You don't have to be frozen inside." He looked at me, eyes shining. "Thanks for being my warmth." And just like that, I knew this was just the beginning. After Theo came back from that trip, the air between us shifted in subtle ways. He wasn't closed off exactly, but there was a weight to him that hadn't been there before, like he'd carried something heavy home with him and was still trying to set it down. I wanted to help, but I also knew sometimes people need their own space to sort through things. We fell into a new rhythm. Days spent at his studio, where I'd sip coffee while he worked on his sculptures, evenings wrapped in blankets watching old movies, and long talks that stretched into the early hours. But there were moments when I'd catch him staring off, jaw clenched, like some memory was flickering behind his eyes and refusing to fade. One night, after our quiet dinner, I finally asked, "Theo, what happened back home? You don't have to tell me everything if you're not ready, but I want to understand." He hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck like he was gathering courage. Then he said, "It's complicated. My family and we've never really seen eye to eye. They're traditional, stuck in old ideas about who I should be, especially about me. Coming out wasn't easy for any of us, and being away here was a way to escape all that pressure." I nodded, heart aching for the battles he'd fought silently. "That sounds brutal." "It was, and it still is," he admitted, voice low. "But I'm learning that I don't have to carry their expectations anymore. I'm more than what they want me to be." There was a pause, then he looked at me, eyes searching. "Thanks for sticking around, Matt. For being the warm spot I didn't think I'd find." I smiled, feeling the kind of warmth that doesn't come from blankets or heaters, but from something deeper. "You'd do the same for me." A few days later, the festival committee called Theo about creating a centerpiece sculpture for next year's event. It was a big deal, the kind of opportunity that could launch his career, but I noticed the hesitation when he told me. "I don't know if I'm ready to put myself out there like that," he said, staring at the floor. "What if I fail? What if it's not good enough?" I reached across the table and took his hand. "Theo, you're amazing at what you do, and if anyone can handle the pressure, it's you. I believe in you." His fingers tightened around mine, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of real confidence shining through the nerves. Over the next few weeks, Theo poured himself into planning the sculpture, sketching designs, and talking through ideas with me like I was his sounding board. His excitement was contagious, and I found myself more invested than I ever thought I would be. One chilly evening, we went out to the spot where the sculpture would go. The snow was falling gently, covering the streets in a soft, white blanket. Theo looked around, taking it all in. "This is going to be the biggest piece I've ever done," he said, voice filled with both thrill and doubt. I smiled, wrapping an arm around his shoulders. "And I'll be right here, the warmest thing around, cheering you on." He laughed softly, leaning into me. "You and your cheesy lines." As the deadline approached, the pressure mounted. Theo was in the zone, working late nights in the cold studio, and I did my best to keep things light, bringing him food and reminding him to take breaks. But one night, I found him exhausted, slumped over his workbench. "Hey," I said gently, shaking him awake. "You need to rest." He looked up, eyes glassy. "I'm so close, Matt. I can't stop now." I sighed, pulling him into a hug. "You're not in this alone. Remember that." The night of the unveiling arrived, and the whole town gathered in the square, bundled in coats and scarves, breath misting in the air. Theo's sculpture was stunning, an intricate phoenix rising from a block of ice, shimmering under the lights like it was alive. As people admired his work, I caught Theo's eye. He looked proud but nervous, like he was waiting for some kind of validation. When a group of festival organizers approached and offered him a contract to create ice sculptures for events throughout the year, his face broke into a smile that lit up the freezing night. Later, as the crowd thinned, we stood together, hands intertwined. "You did it," I said, voice full of awe. "We did it," he corrected, squeezing my hand. In that moment, surrounded by ice and light, I realized that sometimes the coldest places can be the backdrop for the warmest beginnings. And with Theo by my side, I was ready to face whatever winter threw at us. After the festival, life settled into a rhythm that was both comforting and exciting. Theo's work started getting more attention. People from nearby towns reached out, interested in commissions, and the local gallery even asked to feature some of his smaller sculptures inside during the off-season. It was like his art was blooming right along with whatever was growing between us, and honestly, I've never felt luckier to witness that. But, as always, things weren't as simple as they seemed on the surface. One afternoon, we were at his studio, the windows fogged up from the heat inside, contrasting with the freezing world outside. He was working on a smaller piece, a delicate heart-shaped sculpture, and I was just watching, sipping tea, when his phone buzzed with a message that made his face tighten. He glanced at it but didn't say anything. Later, when I asked, he brushed it off with a shrug and a forced smile. "Just some family stuff, nothing to worry about." But I could tell it was more than that. That evening, as we walked back through the quiet streets, snow crunching beneath our boots, I nudged him gently. "You know you can talk to me, right? Whatever it is." He paused, looking into the distance, then back at me. "It's just my dad. He called again. Wants me to come back home to fix things, but I don't know if I'm ready or even if I want to." There was a long silence between us, the kind that's heavy but somehow safe. "You don't owe them anything, Theo. Not if it costs your peace." He nodded slowly. "I know. It's just hard to let go of the past when it keeps pulling at you." That night, I watched him wrestle with his own demons, and it made me realize how much I wanted to be the person who helped him carry that burden. Not fix it, because I knew he had to do that himself, but just be there. Days turned into weeks, and the winter deepened. One evening, we were out walking when the sky opened up into a flurry of snowflakes, soft and thick. We ducked under the awning of a small cafe, laughing as we shook off the cold. Over hot cocoa, the conversation turned to dreams, what we wanted beyond the ice and the routines. "I've always wanted to teach," Theo said quietly. "Not just ice sculpting, but art in general. Maybe work with kids who don't have anywhere else to go. It feels like giving something back." I smiled. "That's amazing. You'd be great at that." He looked at me, eyes bright. "What about you? Any secret dreams?" I shrugged, a little embarrassed. "Honestly, I've been so caught up in work and survival mode, I haven't really thought about it. But maybe I want to stop playing it safe, take some risks. Live a little." There was something hopeful in that moment. like we were planting seeds for a future neither of us fully understood yet. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect it. One morning, I woke up to a text from Theo. "Can we talk?" It's important. My heart sank, imagining all the worst-case scenarios. When I got to his place, he was sitting by the window, hands clasped tightly. "I got a call last night," he began, voice heavy. "The gallery wants to take my work to a bigger city. Offer me a residency. It's an incredible opportunity, but it means moving far away." I stared at him, a mix of pride and panic swirling inside. "That's amazing, Theo. But yeah, that's a lot." He nodded. "I don't want to leave you behind." My mind raced. Long-distance relationships, the uncertainty, the what-ifs. But then I realized something. The warmth I felt with Theo wasn't just about proximity. It was about connection. "I'm not going to make this easy for you," I said, stepping closer. "But I want you to chase this. I want us to figure it out together, no matter what distance comes between us." He smiled then, that same soft smile that had first caught my attention in the freezing festival square. "You're crazy, you know that?" "Crazy enough to believe in us," I replied. We spent the next few weeks planning, juggling excitement with the bittersweet reality of change, packing up his studio, saying goodbye to the familiar snow-covered streets, and dreaming about what was next. On the day he left, we stood outside the bus station, the cold biting but my heart full. "Promise me something," he said, eyes searching mine. "Anything, that no matter how far I go, you'll keep being the warmest thing around." I grinned, brushing a stray snowflake from his hair. "Deal." As the bus pulled away, I realized that sometimes love isn't about staying in one place. Sometimes it's about carrying warmth across miles, through the coldest winters, trusting that it will be enough to melt any distance. And honestly, I think we're just getting started. The days after Theo left were strange. The town didn't feel quite the same without him carving ice blocks in the square or laughing with me over coffee. The cold seemed to seep in deeper, not because the temperature dropped, but because the space he left behind was colder than I ever expected. I kept replaying our last moments. His smile, the way his hand lingered in mine before the bus pulled away, the quiet promise we made to each other. I tried to keep busy, throwing myself into my work and the usual distractions. But every time I saw a snowflake catch the light or caught a whiff of pine, I thought of him. It was like the whole town reminded me of Theo in some way. The way the winter wrapped itself around everything, and somehow, him. Our calls and texts became the thread holding me together. We talked about his new city, the gallery, the new people he met, the challenges of starting fresh in a place so different from our quiet town. I could hear the excitement in his voice, but also the exhaustion. Moving and chasing your dreams isn't glamorous. It's hard, lonely, and sometimes downright scary. One night, I caught him during a rare break between gallery visits and art classes. His apartment was cold, he said, the radiator barely keeping up, and I joked that maybe he was still an ice sculptor at heart. He laughed, the kind of laugh that made the distance shrink just a little. "Matt," he said quietly, "how are you holding up?" I hesitated, not wanting to sound weak. "Honestly, it's rough. I miss you more than I thought I would." There was a pause, and then he said, "I miss you too, but I'm proud of us. We're making it work." His words gave me hope, but I knew hope alone wouldn't close the miles. I had to do something. A few weeks later, I surprised him. I booked a ticket to visit. Walking through the airport, heart pounding, I tried to picture what it would be like to see him after so long. Would he still be the same? Would the spark still be there? I found him waiting outside the terminal, bundled in a scarf, cheeks flushed from the cold. When he saw me, his face lit up like the ice sculptures back home. I swear, it was like time folded over itself, and suddenly we were back in that chilly festival square, just with warmer hugs. The days I spent in that city were a whirlwind. I met his new friends, saw the gallery where his sculptures were displayed, and even got to watch him work in a studio filled with the hum of city life instead of quiet snowfalls. One evening, after a long day, We sat on the balcony of his apartment, city lights stretching out below us. The noise was a far cry from the stillness of our town, but with Theo beside me, it felt like home. "I'm glad you came," he said, fingers entwined with mine. "Me too," I replied. "But it's tough, you know? This place, the distance, it's a lot." He nodded, eyes distant. "Yeah, some days I feel like I'm carving through ice that never melts." I squeezed his hand. "Then let me be the fire that helps." For the rest of my visit, we navigated the ups and downs, late-night talks about fears and hopes, quiet mornings sharing breakfast, and small adventures exploring the city's hidden corners. I saw a side of Thea that was both vulnerable and fierce, someone still learning how to balance dreams with reality. When it was time for me to leave, it felt harder than before. Standing at the airport, I pulled him close. "This isn't goodbye, it's just part of the story." He kissed me, soft and sure. "I know. And I'm so lucky to have you." Back home, the snow had started melting, streams running in the streets, signaling the end of winter. Yet, inside me, the warmth Theo sparked kept growing. We made plans, visits, calls, shared projects. I promised myself I'd keep being the warmest thing around, no matter how cold or far apart we might be. And honestly, for the first time in a long time, I believed that love could survive the frost, that it could carve out something beautiful in the hardest seasons. Because sometimes, the brightest flames burn strongest in the coldest places. Winter turned to spring, and with it came a slow, steady thaw. Not just outside, but between us as well. After my visit, Theo and I settled into a new kind of rhythm. One that wasn't defined by distance or uncertainty, but by a quiet commitment to figure things out together, however messy that might get. We talked more honestly than ever, sharing the small, everyday things alongside the big fears and hopes. I started sending him little care packages, warm socks, my terrible homemade cookies, and he'd send photos of his latest sculptures, some framed by the soft light of his apartment, others waiting to be unveiled in galleries I could only dream of visiting. Months later, when the chill of winter crept back in, Theo surprised me by moving back home, not because he was giving up on his dreams, but because he realized that the best kind of warmth wasn't found in big cities or glamorous galleries. It was here, in the messy, imperfect place, where we could build something real. The day he arrived, I stood outside the station, heart racing like the first time I saw him sculpt that giant block of ice. When he stepped off the train, tall and just as quietly captivating as ever, I pulled him into a hug that felt like coming home. That evening, in the small apartment that had been his sanctuary and mine, we sat side by side, hands entwined, watching the snow fall outside like a gentle promise. "I was scared," Theo said softly. "That coming back meant giving up. But now I see it's the opposite. It's starting fresh with you." I smiled, feeling a warmth that no winter could ever freeze. I guess some things are worth melting for. We didn't need grand declarations or perfect endings. Just two people, learning to hold on to each other through the seasons. Ice and warmth intertwined, carving out a life that was theirs alone. And that, I think, is the kind of love that lasts.